We are studying Sri Aurobindo's text titled The Synthesis of Yoga, of which the portion of our current study is themed The Yoga of Integral Knowledge. In this, Sri Aurobindo has articulated the rationale of the path of knowledge as it is traditionally described, and then taken it, broadened it into a framework suitable for an integral realization, while still maintaining the broad theme of the path of knowledge. And thus, in this text, many concepts familiar to the conventional path of knowledge have been reviewed and broadened and expanded for the larger goal that is set for us. The object of knowledge itself, we have seen, it is not an intellectual knowledge that is sought when we speak of the path of knowledge. It is not enough to know intellectually the goal that we seek to realize, to think about it or to describe it in words is not enough. The object of knowledge itself is an experience in which we know the thing because we are it. And this being said, knowledge itself is made the means of realization of something which is beyond knowledge. And therefore, we recognize that the process involves two broad stages. The first, which is more preparatory, and the second, where we are able somehow to disengage from the preparatory methods and means and enter more directly into the experience itself. In the chapter that we had studied just before, he discussed the necessity of the purification, and the purification itself being threefold, because the mind, the intellect, the buddhi, is going to be our means, our primary faculty in the path of knowledge. This buddhi itself must be sufficiently purified, and the purification here is the disengaging from mixtures of other parts and the bringing back its right natural action. And with this, three forms of purification he has discussed. The first is separation from the mixture of desires, so that the thinking consciousness can be free of the mix that desires bring into it, which distort, the emotions which distort. The second is the removal of the mixture of our sense mind. And the third is the removal of distortions which come in the very effort to understand. The moment we try to know something, there is already an implied bias. And that bias distorts already what we seek to know. And to be able to be in a state of perfect disinterestedness in mind allows the mind then to seek what you wish to know without limitation and without distortion. But if purification is the first preparation, there is now the requirement of its complementary effort, which is concentration. And the two, we have seen, are deeply interdependent. Purification makes possible now the gathering of the consciousness in focus, in concentration. Concentration, on the other hand, is the means by which purification becomes complete, because it is by concentrating on a state, by concentrating on a function, that it becomes clear and separate from the mixtures. And so these two, Sri Aurobindo describes as the passive and active facets of a double movement. And the chapter we are now studying elaborates on what it is that this concentration is, on what it is that we have to concentrate, and broadens the whole sense of concentration and the goal of concentration to bring it in line with the broader objects of an integral yoga. In this, we saw last time that in summarizing the passage of the traditional yogic process, Sri Aurobindo identifies what is important in that system, but then also he shows where it falls short and then broadens the goal. So for us, it is important to recognize that it is not a rejection of a traditional path, but rather of a completion, of a taking it to its highest possibility. Concentration itself, Sri Aurobindo says, has three powers. The first is the power to know whatever we do not know. By concentrating on what we seek to know, we can come to know it. Second is the power to acquire what we do not have. By concentrating on something which needs to be got, we are able to get it. And the third is to attain to a status of consciousness, a state of being which we are not. We are, the example he gives, we are, for example, perhaps a mass of weakness and fear, and we can become a mass of strength and courage. So the first is knowledge, the second is the use of concentration for the will, and the third is the use of concentration to become. The state of being itself can be completely changed. And in all three, the normal objects of concentration in the world are set aside in the yoga of knowledge, and we turn these three powers of concentration towards that which is the only thing worth knowing, worth acquiring, worth becoming, the self. That being the direction in which the yoga of knowledge takes us, Sri Aurobindo summarizes the stages articulated in the discipline of Raja Yoga for attaining to this identification with the self. So first, he says, there is a certain moral and spiritual purification, and you get rid of the lower and downward activities of the mind through a process of yama, niyama, asana, and pranayama. Afterwards, we stop the activities of the mind and concentrate on the one idea that leads from activity to quiescence. Now, these steps we will observe carefully now, because he's going to show us the importance of these, but also how they are to be broadened into something more complete as a practice. So this process of turning, withdrawing, is the pratyahara. Subsequent to that is the stage in which the object is seized, the dharana, the state in which the object is held, dhyana, and then the state in which the mind is lost in the status which the object represents, samadhi. And it is towards this that we are going. We saw also that the principle of these stages applies to any goal that you may direct the concentration to. You may direct the concentration to gain a specific knowledge of a mathematical problem or a problem of physics. The scientist, when he concentrates to know something which he does not have, goes through exactly these stages. You may not name them as such, but there is this passage where you withdraw from your current engagement with things of the world, gather all your attention into a certain direction of your focus. It's a pratyahara. And then there is a point where you make contact with the thing which you wish to know. That is the dharana. And then there is the point where you are now immersed in this station, holding what you want to know and exploring, entering into it more and more fully, the dhyana. And finally, there's a point where you forget yourself. You are now so fully immersed that you are one with the thing which you wish to know. And that is the state of samadhi. However, superficially, it is when you reach this point of self-forgetfulness into that which you wish to know, that you have the knowledge of the thing itself. The deeper the samadhi, the more complete the access to the knowledge. When you think of it in this way, you will see that we all tend to do exactly this in any activity that we seek to attain to excellence. Even a gymnast doing an exercise of gymnastics, if you observe the broadcast of an Olympic gymnast, you will find them walking up to the point where they're going to start the activity. They rub their hands, but they're already sufficiently gathered, and then they stop, become completely still. If they have not reached that point of complete stillness, they will not succeed. It is at that point that there is a complete disengagement and loss of all awareness of anything else. And sometimes the crowd is shouting and screaming. Sometimes in the midst of a whole movement, there is this huge excitement and noise of thousands of people shouting. And the gymnast is so fully concentrated on the activity that all of that is felt as far away, not affecting them at all. And it is this state of complete concentration where you become one with the thing itself, which assures the perfection of the thing that is done. If you watch carefully, you can notice sometimes when the mind wavers slightly. This is seen not so easily in the Olympics, but in the pre-Olympics, in national or in state level competitions, you will see the mind waver slightly, and a moment later there is an error, a mistake, something slips, someone falls. But you can see the mind waver, the concentration slightly shaking. And that's the point where they have moved out of that samadhi and you lose the thing which you have. So you see the principles described here, the practice of the discipline of Raja Yoga and the very specific formed stages that it describes, have applications in every field. And Sri Aurobindo deliberately uses a vocabulary which is general. He says, whatever the object represents, and you may apply this to anything. Knowledge of something, something to be acquired, something to become, and the state of perfection of the gymnast's movements is the state that the gymnast concentrates upon. I have had occasion to describe this in other circumstances, and it is worth mentioning here that in the practice of training for athletics or gymnastics, or even in certain specialized games at international competitions, the practices involved are only half physical. The other half of the training is all psycho-spiritual. The gymnasts are asked actually to sit down, to practice meditation, to practice visualization of their activity, and in their visualization to see it perfectly done. Not just to visualize as a third person seeing it perfectly done, but to put oneself in identity with the perfect movement, done in a state of concentration, which is a state of deep meditation. And these are the practices today by which those who attain to that level of physical perfection are able to reach it and perform consistently again and again of that high standard. The same methods taught in yoga for attaining to the divine realization can equally be applied to attaining to any physical, vital, or mental skill to perfection. And they are used thus. So that is, we take that as an aside, and Sri Aurobindo now sees how he describes how even in the Raja Yogic Samadhi, there are 3 stages, which we saw last time. And all of these can be seen, all of these stages of the Raja Yoga can be practiced with the support of various crutches which Sri Aurobindo lists. He says, in all yoga, there are indeed many preparatory objects of thought concentration. If after all, the essential process is a gathering of thought, concentrating of our awareness, developing the skill of concentration becomes extremely important. And you do not ask somebody to sit down and start concentrating on the self. You will say, what is the self? How do I concentrate on the self? So obviously something must be given which is accessible, and then step by step, the power of concentration itself is developed, perfected, and then deepened towards that which otherwise would be at first abstract. And with each step, that highest goal is now more accessible, more close. Towards the end of this chapter, when Sri Aurobindo discusses the essence of the whole faculty of concentration and the thing on which we have to concentrate, he speaks of concentrating on the idea. Now already, for somebody to be asked to hold attention on an idea is not easy. So before you can hold attention on an idea, you have to hold attention on something which prepares you, develops your concentration now to be able to hold attention on the idea. Before you can get to this intermediate stage, you have to prepare yourself with something more accessible. Taking the principle of near to the far from education, which Sri Aurobindo describes, you start with something which is accessible to your senses, something which is more familiar to you. And then from there you grow to things which are more and more abstract. So obviously the preparatory stages and objects of thought concentration would begin with forms first. And then verbal formulas of thought, where it is a word that you repeat, but which means something more. From there we move to significant names, where only a name is held, but the name contains within it a whole range of facets of meaning and essential ideas beyond the domain of name. And these are typically the stages in which one is led when developing both the power of concentration as well as directing it towards the highest object. But all of which, he says, are supports to the mind in this movement, all of which have to be used and transcended. We discussed this briefly last time, and I mentioned in passing, but it is worth repeating. The error often made is to cling to the very practice which has helped us to move forward. I started with a practice given to me, let's say visualizing a form or repeating a certain mantra or a name. It has brought me to a certain stage of development, opened the domain of experience for me. And then after a while, I become so attached to the method itself that I'm unable to let go to something which will lead me still deeper into the experience. I stay bound to the method and I stay stuck there. Very often you will see people using the mala, counting the beads. Often it is tied to a complete cycle of 108. And so the person completes the cycle, or it does some certain number of cycles. But if you ask yourself, what is the point of the mala? It is only an aid to count. And why do you count? Because you decided you wanted to do so a certain number, 108 or certain thousands or whatever it is. But if you think about the intention which is behind what you're aiming to realize or experience, the number is irrelevant. If you're doing it purely as a ritual practice, every morning after my bath, I will sit down and do a mala of 108 repetitions. Fine. As a ritual, your 108 is useful. You can reduce it, make it 21, make it 7, make it 3, whatever number means something to you. But even there, as it is taught in the science of mantras, the same exercise done with full attention has greater result than the same exercise done 100 times without attention. Once with full attention has greater result than 100 times without attention. And in that case, perhaps I may even discard the 108 and focus on just doing 3. But with full involvement, full attention, full bhava, feeling, devotion, love, consecration, and I would perhaps attain to the same result. The only reason for doing longer is that I'm unable to build that kind of an intensity in a single effort. And so I need a series of repetitions, each time deepening the intensity, intensifying further until I'm able to reach to a depth of self-loss, where I merge with the thing on which I'm concentrating. And if you think of it in these terms, the actual number that you have to repeat is not important. It is the thing you are getting to which is important. And one may even discard completely the counting process. Simply repeat with as much intensity and involvement as you can. And then when you repeat a second time, you put a greater intensity and greater identification of concentration and involvement. And each time you try to deepen and intensify until it reaches a certain point where now you begin to enter in the experience which you seek. The divine presence is felt vividly, intensely. And at that point, what do? If you have still to continue repeating, you are falling back. There is a point where you have to let go of the form and remain immersed in the experience. Deepen the experience itself. And if the experience is outside, beyond the domain of form, clinging to repetition of form binds you to the earlier stage and prevents you from entering the formlessness of the pure experience. You have to let go. If at that point the concentration was already deep enough, you will find on its own the mechanical repetition of the mantra stops. And rather the bhava, the mood, the feeling of the mantra sustains, and the momentum of that carries you beyond the domain of form. But recognizing that the mantra was only an aid to the experience, we may of our own allow it to lapse as we drift into the deeper stages. So this is extremely important. All the methods, all the supports have to be used and transcended. And there will come a point where even the mantra's repetition will become secondary. You will sit down in concentration, turn your attention now towards the familiar experience and simply drift into it, lean into it and connect. The mantra, if at all spoken, will be repeated once or twice as the heart's spontaneous, joyous movement of adoration, and then the words will lapse, the movement will continue. The highest support, according to the Upanishads, is the mystic syllable Om, whose 3 letters represent the Brahman, or Supreme Self in its 3 degrees of status: the waking soul, the dream soul, and the sleep soul. And the whole potent sound rises towards that which is beyond status, as beyond activity. For of all yoga of knowledge, the final goal is the transcendent. We dwelt on this syllable Om last time, and I thought, since Sri Aurobindo takes trouble to put in the footnote a reference to the Mandukya Upanishad, I thought it worth for us to take a brief digression to see what it is that the Mandukya offers us and particularly of relevance to the theme itself that is here. Sri Aurobindo many times uses quotations or makes reference to passages casually, but when he refers in this way, it is because there is something there which is an elaboration of an important idea, which he does not here bother to elaborate on. He will, in fact, in the later part of this chapter, describe these three statuses of the Brahman, what is described as the waking state, dream state, and sleep state. But the Om symbolizing these three is the point here for which he refers to the Mandukya. And we take a brief look, not to the entire text, but Sri Aurobindo's translation of the Mandukya. And associated with that, which he has not referred to here, is the Chandogya, where also the Om is described. In the text, as Sri Aurobindo has translated of the Mandukya, the first verse goes thus: Om is this imperishable word. Om is the universe. And this, that is the text that follows, is the exposition of Om. The past, the present, and the future, all that was, all that is, all that will be, is Om. Likewise, all else that may exist beyond the bounds of time, that too is Om. If you just take this first verse and hold its sense as the theme of the concentration, as you chant Om, you can see the sense of the chant is completely different. In the way it is popularly done, you simply take Om is the sacred word, so I'm going to repeat Om. And you just go Om, 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 Om. But if you see what is meant by Om, first, Om is the imperishable word. There is the word, you will find the same idea in the Chandogya Upanishad, which begins by saying Om is the Akshara. Akshara is moving. Akshara is that which does not move, which is permanent, which is eternal, imperishable. And obviously there is a double meaning here. It's not the letter Akshara, because the Akshara also means letter. It's not that. It is this unmoving reality, permanent. So Om here is the imperishable, and yet it is word. Word meaning it is also movement in manifestation. Something imperishable moving to manifest, to reveal, to express itself. And what is it that it reveals when it expresses itself? Om is the universe. You see the sequence of thought very clearly follows. Om is the universe. And so now we conceive not only that which is imperishable, eternal, one, but it revealing itself in the word and becoming, manifesting as the universe. And this universe is the exposition of Om. Everything that unfolds in the universe is telling you the story of Om, of the source which is imperishable, and the unfolding of the unchanging, imperishable reality, unfolding and revealing itself, unveiling its story, unveiling its secrets, its delights, its dreams, its creations. That is the universe, and all this is the exposition of Om. And now from this, the verse helps us break free of our mind's limitations. So far, whatever we have understood, whatever we have conceived, is what our mind could naturally catch. When we say universe, what does your mind point to? What does your mind think of? All this. And perhaps you have in your mind a picture of the galaxies far away, and the solar system, the sun, the planets, the earth, and the universe is all this. Yes, it is, but that's not all. So the text breaks the limits which are natural to the limited mind. The past, the present, and the future. All that was, all that is, all that will be is Om. So when we speak of the universe and Om as the unfolding of the universe, it's not just this. It's all the past, all the present, and all the future. Not just what happened in the past, but all that attempted to happen in the past. Not just the present of the universe as it is, but all that is attempting to happen in the present, but which could not happen. And all the possibilities which could have been are all included in the Om. And in the future, not just what will be, but everything that can possibly be. Even which will never be because it is impossible for it to happen or most unlikely to happen. But yet, in the domain of possibility, if it is there, that also is included. All of that is Om. Likewise, so still we have now seen in all of infinity of time and all of infinity of space. But what about the limits beyond? Because in our mind we can conceive of something outside the universe, something before time was born, transcending. So, likewise, all else that may exist beyond the bounds of time, that too is Om. So, in just a single verse, very briefly stated, there's a whole different sense of Om. Now, if you took this idea, held this idea in your mind, put all your awareness on this, and then began the chant of Om, you can see how different the experience would be. And each time as you would chant the Om, you will remember it is the imperishable word, and as the word, when you chant it, revealing itself, becoming the universe. And so when you chant Om, you align yourself to that original creative self-revealing vibration which became the universe, the pranava, the original vibration of which our physical chanting Om is the symbol, a reflection, a small ripple of the enormous ocean's infinity of waves. And you keep that in mind, and as you chant the Om, you align yourself to that vibration and know this sound to be only a part, a tiny ripple in the universal movement of the chant of Om, the manifestation of the divine becoming the universe. And as you repeat like this, as you dwell on this, you can see what happens already. Your sense of I, me, and my has already become thinned. Perhaps even very quickly you forget yourself. You're fully dwelling on this infinity and eternity and the totality, and dwelling also on that which is beyond what you could conceive of. And all that is one. And so there is naturally a leaning back on the sense of underlying oneness, which holds it all together, the underlying imperishable origin. And the whole chant leads you towards that and to identification with that. In the subsequent verses, there is now a development of this idea and an elaboration, each of which adds to this whole picture, also reveals finer distinctions of the manifestation, and so on. Verse 2 goes, all this universe is the eternal Brahman. This self is the eternal, and the self is fourfold. So, all this, meaning all this manifestation, is Brahman. And this I am Atma, this person that I feel myself to be, is also Brahman. And this self is fourfold. It's making an identification between the individual and the whole universe. But the identity is held only in the origin, in the Brahman. And then, in the experience of that, is a four-layered experience. And then he discusses the waking consciousness, the dream state, and the sleep state, and that which transcends all these. I'm skipping several of the verses. And verse 8 says, now this, the self, as to the imperishable word, is Om. And as to the letters, his parts are the letters, and the letters are his parts, namely A, U, Ma. And then he discusses how each of these is, first is A, the Vaishvanara, U is the here the term used is Tejasa, and the Ma is the Prajna, and each describing why. So we don't go into it too much, but culminating with, in the verse 12, letterless is the fourth state of Brahman. The incommunicable, the end of phenomena, the good, the one than whom there is no other, thus is Om. He that knoweth is the self and entereth by his self into the self. He that knoweth. He that knoweth. So this is Sri Aurobindo's translation. And in the Chandogya Upanishad, similarly, the very first verse starts with this in Sri Aurobindo's translation. Worship ye Om, the eternal syllable. Om is the Udgita, the chant of Samaveda. For with Om they begin the chant of Sama, and this is the exposition of Om. And the rest is, again, elaboration and development. And Sri Aurobindo explains that to the Vedic mind, it is the Brahman which is symbolized as Om, but when you say Om, it is this fourfold Brahman. So the moment the Vedic Rishi chants Om, in his consciousness, it is this fourfold reality, and holding it in terms of past, present, and future, and the totality. That is what he conceives when he says Om. So when he says Om is the akshara, the syllable, it is a play on the word, the imperishable one. So Sri Aurobindo translates as this, Om is the syllable, the imperishable one. And then it is also the Udgita, the upward rising movement of the chant. Sri Aurobindo translates as, one should follow after it as the upward song movement. For with Om, one sings, goes upward. And there's a whole elaboration, all of which are worth reading for the richness of and the subtlety which he brings forward in his commentary. And the whole etymology of the word, the sound, and how the Vedic rishis conceived of it. Now, if you think of it in this way, the chant of the Om is described here. The highest support, according to the Upanishads, is the mystic syllable Om. And now you understand why. Because as the Om, not only it contains the full sense of the divine reality, from the transcendent to the most material physical experience of the cosmos, but as a vibration, it aligns us with the whole creative movement of the pranava, of the manifestation, which flows out from the source. And our mind dwelling on it as if follows back upward in the stream, back to the source, rising and merging in it. That's why he says the whole potent sound rises towards that which is beyond the status as beyond activity. So when you do the Om and you follow it with the clear distinction of the Uma, not just Om, but Om. And then with the Ma, as you fade out, with your consciousness, you follow into the silence. And the silence is that fourth station into which your consciousness merges and loses itself in the silence. And in all of this, which we have seen so far, among all the practices and the particular goal that is set, you see a clear one-pointedness to that which is cessation of all activity, to that in which everything stops, everything merges into the formless, transcendent, and that's it. Movement stops, effort stops. Sri Aurobindo, having shown already the validity of the method, now makes a distinction both towards the goal of the goal as well as the way in which the method is practiced. And he broadens both to bring it in line with the integral yoga. We have, however, conceived as the aim of an integral yoga something more complex and less exclusive positive of the highest condition of the soul, less exclusive negative of its divine radiations. So here comes something which is a favorite concept. You will find Sri Aurobindo returning to this again and again, but also which finds equal support in the Veda and in particular in the Isha Upanishad, where the idea is that the divine is not known unless he is known entirely from one extreme to the other. So the highest condition of the soul is in that transcendence, but the divine radiation manifesting into the universe is the other extreme. So in the Isha Upanishad, Sri Aurobindo points out, the Upanishad says that one who loses himself in the world, in the multiplicity, loses himself in darkness. But one who loses himself in the unity loses himself in a greater darkness. And so, obviously, we are asked to, we wonder, how is it that that which is our goal becomes a greater darkness? And Sri Aurobindo explains that when you lose yourself in the multiplicity, the way life works, it inevitably shocks you into wakefulness, breaks you out of that multiplicity to something more essential. By the very nature of life and the series of shocks it gives you, it will push you the other way towards the unity. But when you go deep into the unity and lose yourself in that, there is nothing there to push you back into the multiplicity. There is also the further danger that as you withdraw into the unity, if the means by which you withdraw in the unity is the gateway of the mind facing that which is beyond mind loses itself, it falls back, and as the consciousness transcends the mind, it looks back at all that the mind saw and sees it as illusory. And suddenly the whole world is seen as illusory, deceptive, dreamlike, worthy only of being extinguished. And yes, this is a genuine experience, but it is not the whole experience. The more complete experience would recognize that the mind itself was formed out of that. And mind, being a secondary power, cannot see the world for what it actually is. The way mind sees the world is illusory, but world is not illusory, because world is born out of and made of that divine consciousness. born out of the Satchidananda itself, is made of Satchidananda. But mind unable to see the Satchidananda sees only phenomenal reality which is illusory. And therefore, if the transition into that transcendence was made by different consciousness than mind, a true consciousness which can see things for what they actually are, the way that sees, it would see the world as body and form of manifestation of the One, and not illusion, a fact. And so the whole game changes. And then if you go exclusively into the oneness, you've gone into a darkness because you have lost the reality which is his reality. And you do not see it anymore. You have discarded it. And you do not know Brahman in his completeness. You do not know Brahman as he knows himself. You have lost yourself in the attic, in some corner of the Brahman, and you say, this is all. You have not discovered his beautiful play in the multiplicity and in the manifestation. And so, Sri Aurobindo says, less exclusively positive of the highest condition of the soul. The traditional path as they survive today looks at that highest condition exclusively and says that is all. So he says we have to be less exclusively positive of that. And the other side, when you turn towards the world, it says all this is illusory or false or a domain of suffering and therefore to be abandoned. And so he says less exclusively negative of its divine radiations, because the world is formed of the divine radiations, and we are less negative, less exclusively negative. The wording is so subtle. We still see the negativity of the world. We still recognize that in the world is a condition of fragmentation, of loss or forgetfulness of the divinity. There is therefore a condition of suffering, etc., of ignorance, of darkness. But we do not see it exclusively as that. We see all this as a covering, an appearance, a mask put on by the divine for a certain purpose, an intermediate transitory passage leading to something greater. So yes, it's negative, but it's not exclusively negative. Yes, that is positive, but that is not exclusively positive. And so there is a correction and viewing of the whole. This being the aim of the integral yoga, to realize the totality of the divine and then to participate in that divine play as a conscious participant. Therefore, he says, we have to review many things. What do we have to review? We must aim indeed at the highest, the source of all, the transcendent, but not to the exclusion of that which it transcends. Rather, as the source of an established experience and supreme state of the soul, which shall transform all other states and remold our consciousness of the world into the form of its secret truth. So many important ideas here brought together. First, we see that, yes, that is the highest, the source, and the transcendent. But what does it transcend? It transcends all this, which is its own manifestation. And so, what is the relationship of the transcendent with all the manifestation? He says that is the source of the experience, of an established experience and a supreme state of the soul which shall transform all other states. So when we look at the manifestation and we see in the manifestation fragmentation, breakup, separation, loss of oneness, loss of freedom, loss of consciousness, and all the rest, each fragment though is still essentially that, putting up a certain limited front. That carries therefore the secret of this to be liberated. That carries the power which will transform the state of this. The state of this being right now in ignorance, fragmented and lost. The release of it will come by the action of that. And that will remold our consciousness, the consciousness of the world, into the form of its secret truths. The truths there, as it moves to manifest, in the manifestation, the truth is hidden, lost in fragmentation. But the power of the transcendent entering and now reshaping, recasting things can cast them into its mold. And then you have a divine revelation, a divine manifestation. The true sense of the Leela, the divine play, consciously revealed. So this is, Sri Aurobindo has a series of statements, starting from this, which is the most essential idea. He takes it more and more to an obvious, to an overt description of what it is that we have to see. So the second statement, we do not seek to excise from our being all consciousness of the universe, but to realize God, truth and self in the universe, as well as transcendent of it. So while many traditional paths may aim to remove from us all awareness of the universe so that you may merge fully into the beyond, here the goal is not removal of the universe, the consciousness of the universe from ourselves, but realization of that in the universe as well as beyond it. You can realize the divine outside the universe. It is a great thing, for sure, because it frees your consciousness. But on the other hand, to realize the divine in the universe completes that realization. And we want both. Third, we shall seek, therefore, not only the ineffable, but also his manifestation. And what is the form in which he manifests? As infinite being, consciousness, and bliss, embracing the universe and at play in it. So the infinite being, infinite consciousness, infinite bliss, the Sat, Chit, Ananda, are his manifestation. In the way we articulate it in the philosophy, the divine consciousness is unknowable, essentially. There is nothing in form or word or expression which can ever capture that. Unknowable completely, beyond knowing. But he can know himself. And if he knows himself, he is not blind and incapable of knowing himself. When he knows himself in these triple ways. Sat, Chit, Ananda. He knows I am. I am that I am in the biblical tradition. And his awareness of what he is pure awareness. And that awareness is pure bliss. And so Sat, Chit, Ananda are the way he knows himself. And the moment he chooses to know himself, he is known and knowable as Satchidananda, although he transcends even the Satchidananda. And so his manifestation as infinite being, consciousness and bliss. And from the Satchidananda comes the further play into multiplicity of divided consciousness. But the Satchidananda is the support on which this play takes place. So from this station, embracing the universe and at play in it. So there are two degrees. The first is the Satchidananda holds the foundation on which the whole multiplicity emerges. And it enters into the multiplicity for the play. In the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo has a very interesting description of matter. And he goes bit by bit all the way down how energy becomes matter. And matter itself is this flux of particles which combine to form stable structures, but inherently are still in a state of flux within. And then he explores what is it that is a particle. And then he points out the particle is something which dwells upon itself, binds itself upon itself, cutting off everything else. But what it holds internally It is. And it is an awareness which is in a state of trance, dwelling on itself. And that state of trance of itself is a blissful trance. So what do you have here? Sat Chit Ananda. But choosing now to dwell on its own limitation of form, closing itself off from its own infinity, and thus creating the appearance of an infinitesimal and an infinity of infinitesimals. If you think of it this way, Satchidananda fully revealed is that divine station. Satchidananda choosing to hide itself from itself becomes then the rest of the cosmos, the lower gradations of fragmentation, ending finally in matter. You take a particle of matter, a proton or electron or neutron or any of the quarks or whatever particular quality that is thrown out in that particle, and if you were to enter it, you would discover Satchidananda lost in trance. A trance of self-forgetfulness, but it is still Satchidananda. So the whole universe is Satchidananda, but now we see Satchidananda in two stations. One which is supporting, holding and embracing the whole universe, free in itself, knowing itself, and the other entering into the universe and at first choosing to lose itself, forget itself. And then later, because there is still a distant memory, nothing is totally forgotten, something remembers a sense of completeness, a sense of wholeness. So these particles now begin to connect with each other, to join, to combine, and then combinations of combinations of combinations, creating these superstructures, phenomenal experiences, becoming elements, becoming cells, plants, animals, human beings, and so on, building a whole movement of awakening, growing back towards the Satchidananda, until eventually in the human consciousness there is the full dawning of the Satchidananda, but now expressed in limited form. So the whole initial impulse to lose itself in limitation is intended to fulfill in an awakening now in limited form. Each individual now becoming an expression of Satchidananda, and all these individuals now expressing in full freedom and delight of Satchidananda the divine play in the manifestation. So we see in this two stations, one holding from outside, embracing, and the other entering. But what enters goes through this whole journey of evolution. Involution first, and then evolution. So the embracing the universe and at play in it. For that triune infinity is his supreme manifestation. And that we shall aspire to know, to share in, and to become. So this is going to be our focus, to know Satchidananda, to share in Satchidananda, and to become. Remember the three powers of concentration. You can know, you can acquire, and you can become. So our focus is going to be to know, to acquire, and to become one with the Satchidananda. And since we seek to realize this Trinity, not only in itself, but in its cosmic play, we shall aspire also to knowledge of and participation in the universal divine truth, knowledge, will, love, which are his secondary manifestations, his divine becoming. So you can, of course, realize the Satchidananda, but what of the rest of the manifestation which emerges out of the Satchidananda? This too we seek to know, but on a different basis. So to have knowledge of and participate in. Now he describes four words which he described as his secondary manifestations. When the Satchidananda now moves to unfold its play, and especially when it moves to manifest in multiplicity, in division of consciousness, At that point, these are the secondary manifestations. In that secondary manifestation, you will see first expression of truth, knowledge, will, and love. And we see how these trace back to the Satchidananda. The Sat of the Satchidananda, sheer existence, that which is by itself, needing nothing else, no reference, not dependent, not relative. When that moves to manifest in multiplicity, in relativity, what is the form that it takes? Something which is true. What is true? That which exists by itself. What is false? That which has no permanent existence. It cannot last, it breaks down eventually. Truth lasts inevitably because it stands on its own firm footing. It does not need something else to justify it. If something is true, it just is. So the Sat moves to express, but it also, in the fragmentation, there are relative truths. But behind the relative truths, there is something which holds them and something which unfolds. So the Vedic term here is the Ritam. The truth moving to manifest, and in the manifestation at this moment, there is something which is true. The next moment, it may no more be classified as true. It changes form, but the inherent truth is still there. And so in the rhythm, there is this idea of rhythms, of unfolding truths. And at each moment, what is true is the reality, and it changes form. It grows, it changes, it unfolds. It is never static in the domain of form. So there is truth, which is the secondary expression of the divine manifestation. Second is the chit of the Satchidananda, the consciousness, pure awareness, infinite, complete, again, not relative, not dependent on anything. When it moves in the domain of multiplicity, it takes the form of becoming aware of something, as in knowing it. I know this, I don't know that. So in our human mental experience, did you know that tomorrow this is going to take place? Oh, I didn't know that. The thing is already existing. It's going to take place. But it was not in my domain of awareness. My awareness was incomplete. And knowledge is the completion of my awareness, the taking in of that which was not included, until eventually the complete knowledge would be when I have all awareness. And then it would merge with the chit of the Satchidananda. But still in the domain of fragmentation, of division, you have relative knowledge, relative awareness, partial knowledge, and so on. And then the chit also has the energy of chit, the chit shakti, which here becomes the impulse of will, to do, to act, to fulfill, to realize. And it goes closely with knowledge. I have knowledge, and so I exercise my knowledge to do something. When I act out, my action is effective only when the action is in knowledge, when the action is guided by a deeper understanding or knowing of things. So the knowledge will are twin, both emerging from the chit of the Satchidananda, and then the Ananda, the delight itself. When it moves to the domain of manifestation, it takes the form of what we experience as love. And the love with a capital L is not the emotional sentiment of human or animal love. It is the underlying principle of which the human love is a reflection. And this principle of love in the universe, the mother describes it thus. She says it is this divine love in things which brings together the subatomic particles to form atoms. It brings together the atoms to form molecules. It brings together all life, all form, to bring and manifest a deeper unity. But throughout, in the very act of the expression of the love, in the bringing together, in the unfolding of the play, is the gradual expression of the delight. And so the love in the human, in the manifestation, is the expression of the Ananda. And in its purest form, we know it in the soul's delight of the world experience. The psychic being deep within us, the true soul who journeys across lives, never experiences the sense of danger or fear because it knows itself immortal. But it enjoys the struggle, the surprise, the sense of danger experienced on the surface personality, which doesn't know, which has limitations, which can be surprised. And the soul enjoys this journey as a play. And throughout, its relationship with the world and with the divine is one of love. And in every experience, it experiences the delight of the experience and the delight of the growth. And so these Sri Aurobindo describes as his secondary manifestations, which also we seek to know. And then one more step, and he describes it as his secondary manifestation, his divine becoming, moving into the expression, becoming from the being. And then with this too, we shall aspire to identify ourselves. Towards this too, we shall strive to rise. And when the period of effort is past, allow it, by our renunciation of all egoism, to draw us up into itself in our being, this being the Satchidananda, to draw us up into itself in our being and to descend into us and embrace us in all our becoming. So this becomes now, in summary, the whole movement of the divinization of the life. Sri Aurobindo's foundation of the whole yoga is not only the realization of the divine, but the manifestation of the divine, which is the divine's purpose in manifesting the universe. And we participate in that purpose and fulfill it by conscious choice and participation. And the process here is summarized. We also aspire to identify ourselves with this Satchidananda. So that's the first stage, aspiring to identification, and you see where the concentration moves. And then when the period of effort is past, so there's a period where you have to struggle, and then there's an identification which takes place, and now no more the struggle is needed. At that point, allow it, by our renunciation of all egoism, to draw us up into itself in our being. So the second phase is when effort is past, you renounce all sense of separation of ego and merge into that. And interestingly, the next chapter is titled Renunciation, because it deals with this whole process, what it means, what is true renunciation. So at that point, you let go of your sense of separateness, and in your being, you're taken up, it draws you into itself. And there's an identification in your being. But also remember, the universe is its becoming. So when we emerge in identification in its being, the next movement, descend, and to descend into us and embrace us in all our becoming. So when in our consciousness we have merged with that, that must now fill the mind, fill the heart, fill the life energies, fill the body, embracing, and then transforming, reforming them in its terms so that they become now instruments of a divine expression. This, and finally Sri Aurobindo concludes the full picture, this not only as a means of approach and a passage to his supreme transcendence, but as the condition, even when we possess and are possessed by the transcendent, of a divine life in the manifestation of the cosmos. So all this, and especially this last part, when we have possessed the transcendent, when we have been possessed by the transcendent, even at that stage, this will not be simply a passage to realize him. It will be the condition of a divine life in the manifestation of the cosmos. That is, we will be participants in a divine life in the cosmos. And we will hold this state of identification and realization in all of our being, in the divine life, in the manifestation, not a withdrawal and dissolution into something beyond. So now this is the overall goal set, and the goal now articulated in terms of the effort of our concentration. What does it mean for us in practice? How then should we concentrate? What do we direct our concentration to? And what is the meaning of samadhi? Because we saw samadhi, as it is normally understood, is an immersion into the transcendent exclusively. So what will be the state of samadhi in life? Will it be different from the state of immersion in the transcendence? Or will there be a samadhi which will be continuous from the transcendent to the most material, which we can hold? Is there such a thing? And is there a status of concentration where we will not have to withdraw from the world to focus on the self? Because that was the process, remember, as described in the Raja Yoga. But we can hold a state of concentration while being in the world in all activity, where the concentration is continuous from the awareness of the transcendent to all the levels down into the manifestation, a single state of concentration. And as we will see, the answer is yes. The rationale for that, how can you be concentrated in the awareness of the world? It doesn't make sense, because concentration we see only as a narrowing of focus. And he will explain the true sense of concentration, and it is something so extraordinary. There is nothing which discusses this in such depth, going to the very sense of the concentration. But just to summarize, because not all of us will be here the next time, then the picture would be incomplete if we paused it here. Sri Aurobindo explains that the concentration itself is a reflection of the divine focus of tapas, the divine concentration of his consciousness, by which and through which the whole manifestation is born. And when we concentrate, we are actually replicating in a tiny part that same process. But there is at first a strenuous process of fixing attention and all that. But afterwards, there is a station that you can come to when you're identified with the concentration of the divine consciousness. The divine, when he concentrates, is holding a single concentration from which the multiplicity emerges. When your concentration now goes deep and then finally settles in that station, it is one single concentration which holds all these things in a single gaze. So everything in the world, every experience, every act, every possibility is like held in that single one concentration. You do not have to concentrate on things separately. So there's a status of concentration towards which we will have to grow, where one single state holds everything spontaneously. Obviously, that station is above the mind. It is a supra-mental status. But that is then a single state which knows the transcendent, which knows the universe down to the most material, and holds it all in a single vision of a single supportive concentration. When we are in such a station, anything we do, because it is a part of that one concentration, it has the backing of that concentration. And we can be doing 20 different things. Each will have equally the backing of the same one concentration. And there is no more at that point an effort at concentration. Concentration itself is no more exclusive. It is inclusive because it is stationed behind everything. And just read one line from a text which we'll come to later. Held by it, each activity, each spontaneously works itself out, not through a separate act of will, but by the general force of consciousness behind it. If to us, in our current state, there seems to be a concentration of divine will and knowledge in each, it is multiple and equal and not an exclusive concentration. And the reality of it is rather a free and spontaneous working in a self-gathered unity and infinity. The soul which has risen to the divine samadhi participates in the measure of its attainment in this reversed condition of things. Reversed because it is the reverse of the mind. It is for this reason that, as it is said in the ancient books, the man who has arrived at self-possession attains spontaneously, without the need of concentration in thought and effort, the knowledge or the result which the idea or the will in him moves out to embrace. So in an earlier portion he says, the divine is centered in itself, and when it throws out ideas and activities, does not divide itself or imprison itself in them, but holds them and their movements in its infinity, undivided. Its whole self is behind each idea and each movement, and at the same time behind all of them together. So this is the station of samadhi, and this is the nature of the concentration which will be sought. And you will see naturally now, it's quite obvious. This allows you to be in the world, fully possessed of the world's possibilities, but from a station of freedom and mastery. And to be able to act in the world from a station of mastery, in which the divine is known from its highest transcendence all the way to the tiniest material act, and the whole is held in a single samadhi of concentration, free, spontaneous, effortless. So that is the outcome of this discussion in the chapter. And then at the end, which we will not discuss now, he discusses 3 processes of meditation or concentration, which we can use in our practice to attain to this station of consciousness. I think we can pause here. Today, I believe the dining room is early, so some of you would need to go soon. But we can just take 5 minutes for any questions or any comments, anything you want to share.
Actually, there is a senior citizen who has made some sauerkraut job. And then in that celebration, aura and calmness, everything is observed. But at the end of his life, it was totally contrary. And so some of the parts are not perhaps changed. But this type of concentration can give such results.
Yes, obviously. But when people do a large number of repetitions of a mantra, invocation, prayer, whatever form it takes, it has its value. Even if it is done with focus on the numbers and the counting, the word itself and the idea behind the word exists in spite of us. And our act of repeating provides it a vehicle for spreading its vibrations in the material domain. So even if a person were to repeat the mantra with no understanding of the meaning, if the mantra already contains a power, it would activate that power. It would bring that vibration into the atmosphere and produce a change. If not on himself, on his environment at least, the change may be partial in the person because only a part of his consciousness is dwelling on it. But it would still have a result, and a result which would be tangible and beneficial to people. So we need not be dismissive of such practice. But the goal was rather to recognize the limitation of focusing only on the number and only on a technique, forgetting the thing to which the technique is supposed to take us. In the yogic tradition, they say, when you have to cross the river, you take the boat. But when you reach the other shore, you leave behind the boat. Because now it's no more relevant for the further journey. So it is something like that.
The second question is that this modern management, they say that now 21st is a knowledge society. So in 19th century, the farmer society has collapsed. Collapse means what they are telling, the number of people who were seeking and producing
Yes.
They are very much. And 20th was a capital society where 80% capital and 20% knowledge. Now 21st is 80% knowledge and 20% capital. So all throughout the progress is through money and power. Now the further leading will be towards the integral knowledge.
It's an interesting question. We are heading for a knowledge society. Before that, there was an industrial capital and farming society. If you see the unfolding of human development, there are always cycles. So after the knowledge society, there will be something else. When our capacity to utilize knowledge is pushed to a limit, suddenly we will realize something is missing. And already we are beginning to feel that what is missing in our knowledge society is a dehumanization, loss of human contact. We are now separated by emails and messages and SMSs and live chats, and all that is fun up to a point, and then suddenly I'm all alone, sitting at home, connecting with the whole world through these media. I miss the contact of the heart. And the next thing will be people step out of their homes and hug each other, and then we will have a human society of love and affection, of relation. The thing is, these things go in cycles, and nature uses the cycle as a way of pushing a possibility to its maximum to ensure it is imprinted permanently in us and the gains are no more lost. So, for that, she must exaggerate it to its limits. And then she releases the pressure, and suddenly people start thinking, oh my God, what have I been doing? And then we move to something else, which now she pushes as the theme. But if you look at these four words, truth, knowledge, will, love, you will see they're represented in these phases. When we spoke of, for example, the industrial period, or where the will was the important thing. We will do, we will conquer, we will overcome, we will change the world according to our rationality, right? So there was something of the will which was stronger there, and the knowledge itself was used as a practical knowledge to accomplish our desire. I want to gain this, and I gain the knowledge to do it. Knowledge was subservient to something else, where the will was stronger. There is also the period of idealism, which we may associate with the truth phase, where something is true in itself, and we try to realize that and actualize that. And there are phases of an idealism dominating humanity. And we seek for an inherent truth which we glimpse to give form to it. And then there is this period where the love has to flow, where suddenly the personal contact, personal relation becomes the basis for everything else. If you see, even today, a businessman is not successful merely on the strength of his effort, not merely successful on the strength of his capital, not merely successful on strength of his knowledge or patents or informational ownership. He must have a network. When he knows the right people, and the right people have goodwill for him, then only he can enable to realize what he wants. Why do they have goodwill for him? Because of love. Now you may cover it in so many layers, and it is not pure love, it has always interests involved. But if there was not behind it a genuineness, the interests would not hold. So if you see, all these facets have to come together. Sometimes there are rhythms where this goes more, sometimes that goes more important. But always they will be together for any success.
But if we bring to some integral,
Always moving. It's like a tapestry, weaving, 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 leading to an integration. Yes.
we speak of the knowledge society and the context in which knowledge is used, comes from a totally different
Yes, true. So the way knowledge is used here with a capital K is knowledge in identity of the self. But human knowledge we may see as a reflection of that in the domain of mind, in the domain of practical application. So that's why we can actually use these words on a much lower level. But what happens is, over time, Initially, the knowledge was practical knowledge. It moved now to something which is more essential, a conceptual knowledge. A patent holds a conceptual knowledge of which you can have many practical applications, right? Software is holding it at a level so essential that even the forms of it are non-material. It is only a pattern of logic and relationships held together in abstraction, for which you need a computer. The memory could be magnetic, it could be capacitive, it could be electronic, it could be ionic, doesn't matter. The vehicle is irrelevant, but some physical device to hold that structure to guide a process. You see, already it's got abstracted to a point. And then the next stage will be the training of the ability to access knowledge. The people who will stand out will be those who can look at a problem, concentrate for a while, and come up with insightful solutions which break through. What we call a genius capacity. So we see this sometimes happening in some of the very elite institutions where there are a lot of young students who have that access to the genius. The teacher puts up a problem. I have a friend with whom I have had a lot of contact in Stanford University. The teacher was writing on the board a problem and he declared, this is not solvable. Because it was part of their training, here's an unsolvable problem. So this young boy concentrated for a while and in 2 minutes he came up with a solution. And this is a solution. And the teacher was flabbergasted. If you ask him how he did it, he'll say, I concentrated on it and then I just saw, that's it. And there are certain problems which involve such great abstraction that even if you followed logically, you would not be able to solve it. You have to see in order to capture it. Now, what is happening next, and which will happen increasingly, a mind capable of accessing knowledge in this way will be more valuable than a mind which can simply articulate a set pattern and repeat what is already taught. These will be the people who make breakthroughs. And soon a method of teaching and training and developing this capacity will become the advanced education. But you see where it's heading. It's heading eventually to a state of consciousness in which you have access to all knowledge. And that is where you are close to the self. Interestingly, this young man does go into very deep states of meditation where he loses himself in something which he has no words to describe. It is from there that the insight comes finally. But the recognition of that as the source and the recognition eventually of that as the one thing worth gaining by which everything else is attained follows naturally. So in the normal human process, there is this weaving, but always rising towards the more essential true knowledge, true will, true love, and true truth. And especially the immediate next leap in humanity, however long that takes, whether it is a decade or 100 years or whatever, the leap for which nature has been pushing is one in which that will be the consciousness which will guide above mind, supra-mental, where knowledge will be like this, accessible, and new manifestations will be of this kind of something extraordinary in each revelation. Sri Aurobindo, in his writings on education, speaks of the development of intuition and even of what are called parapsychological powers. And he says these are all latent possibilities in humanity. And a time will surely have to come where the education will formally help to train and develop these things. So this is a very somewhat technical discussion, but as you can see, with very practical application, and especially when we come to the practice itself of the three forms of concentrated meditation, we will see that they lead in an easy way to this focus of our attention, to realizing something by which our whole consciousness is transformed and progressively divinized in the larger object of our evolution. The clarity which he brings into all these ideas, into this whole domain of pursuit and yogic journey, is something so extraordinary. I always say that if it was not for this kind of clarity, we would still have been wandering and lost with a few interesting ideas, unable to see how they link and how the whole thing is held together in a single grand vision. And it is this which is something so distinctive of Sri Aurobindo's writings. Precision down to the detail, but held in a grand vision where everything is held in a unity. And you can see the whole and say, wow, it is so perfectly and beautifully seen, stated, articulated. We can close with a chant of Om together.